Good evening. Sorry about all this. There's last minute gremlins, as per usual, or sometimes happens. But for those who are joining us, this live stream discussion with Malcolm Mann on two films. One was shown recently on television, which is called Amundsen, which is a biopic of Roald Amundsen. The other is a film that's currently in the cinemas, at least in the UK, which is Operation Mincemeat, which is a true life film, as is Amundsen, on Operation Mincemeat, which was a World War II incident where, well, we'll discuss this when it arrives. At the moment, I'm just doing some quick housekeeping before Malcolm arrives, which should be in about 2 minutes. And yes, just going from there. So if you just bear with me and see how it all goes. I just need to put this through here. No, don't do that. And yes, so if you're interested in polar exploration and World War II, then this is, you're in the right place for a discussion about two films about those respective eras. We'll be discussing Amundsen first, and then we'll be discussing Operation Mincemeat. And it should turn out to be quite a fascinating evening. And again, if you just bear with me, because I just need to check everything and see how it all goes. And yes, the moment Malcolm should be turning up, and which will be good. And yes, I'm just going on Twitter right now just to update people about what we're doing. And here we go. And if count to 10, and then I will be live stream discussion starting now. Oh gosh, why do I always feel like I'm rushing against the tide here? Yeah. Just do your own thing for about 20 seconds, and then I'll be right with you. And I should be with Malcolm. Coming, is he here? There you are.
Good evening.
Good evening. Sorry it took a while. I was literally in the middle of
the
update online. So how are you?
Good, thank you. Yeah, thank you. How are you?
Fine, a bit tired. I realised this evening, not for the first time, I need to seriously have a plan on losing weight. But
yeah, we're both of that age, Paul. We both do.
It's all that little bit harder. I mean, I do miss being in my early 20s when I could literally stuff my mouth with food and drink and no consequences.
Yeah. Well, there were consequences. These are them now, unfortunately.
There is that, isn't there? It's I always used to. Oh God. I always used to look a bit middle-aged people who had lost it. It's like, you didn't keep it up, you didn't, and then of course you reach that age and you see how horribly easy it happens.
Yeah, invisibly over years it happens, and it's harder to get rid of afterwards.
Yes,
I noticed this when the lockdown started. 2020, early 2020, I hardly drank any alcohol. And I thought,
everyone sort of expanded, didn't they? I mean,
I thought, well, I surely will contract because alcohol is a big contributor, and I hardly didn't. I didn't contract at all. Very disappointed.
Oh well. Well, I need to do long walks again.
Yeah.
Anyway, Amundsen and Operation Mincemeat. It's a double feature.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Shall we discuss Amundsen first?
Okay.
Well, first of all, just generally, you've seen both films.
So I've watched both now, yeah.
You've both watched both now. So Amundsen, what did you think of it?
Well, do Scandinavians ever make a happy film or program?
This is actually from what I've read of Amundsen. It's very close to what actually happened compared to.
Right. Well, I mean, he was a bit miserable, wasn't he? For someone so successful, it was. I don't watch many. Well, I don't watch much TV anyway these days, but I know about Scandinavian detective programs.
Yes.
It's supposed to be, I think, very dark. And about 40 minutes into this, I thought, oh, this is just like them.
It's also in the music. I mean, even ABBA has its sort of dark area, doesn't it, really?
Perhaps because they get very dark in the winter or something, and that's when they make their programs, write their songs.
But the winner takes it all.
Sorry?
But the winner takes it all.
Yeah, I see what you did there. The thing I most liked about it, well, I mean, the acting was great. I'm very partial to Edwardian fashion, so I did enjoy that. On the whole, I think for banter reasons, I would just go on about how miserable it was, but it's actually, I thought, a really good film. I knew only the basics about Amundsen before I watched it, but now, well, I know a whole lot more. And if it's true to life or fairly true to life, I've really lucked in. So it was probably not the kind of film I would have ever watched unless I'd been asked to, but I'm awfully glad that now that I was asked to, because it was a good film.
I mean, you say he's miserable. What I'd say in his defense is, if you look at his attempt at his attempt at the South Pole. I mean, I was going to say North Pole, but let's not forget about Amundsen. Not only is he first at the South Pole, he might have been first at the North Pole, for all we know, and he's definitely the first to reach both poles. But let talk about being the first at the South Pole. I mean, you imagine having done what Amundsen did and going back and everyone resentful at you for beating Captain Scott. British being,
I felt very ashamed when we had the Royal Geographic Society.
Oh, they could be.
And they toasted the dogs.
Yeah.
And I thought, no, I couldn't believe they would get away with that.
That did happen, and Curzon has had lots of flack for doing that, and rightfully so.
Sorry, who got the flack?
The Marquis of Curzon, who was the
good. I mean, I would have, if I'd been higher up than him in the social scale, I would have refused. I would have cut him, refused to beat him.
He was Curzon was notable as being Viceroy of India and later Foreign Secretary. But he was known to be such a snob.
Yeah.
Even some of the aristocracy were horrified or disgusted by him. And that is how much of a snob Curzon was, and how cutting he could be. But he one of his daughters married Sir Oswald Mosley. Funnily enough, it became Mosley's first wife. But but the features from the dogs. I mean, the Royal Geographical Society were known for being difficult. I mean, we were talking about Shackleton the other week.
Yeah.
When Shackleton did his furthest south, they were very reluctant to give him the credit and the mere, thing, because they were so pro-Scott. They wanted to pretend it hadn't happened.
Right.
And
Right.
they did sort of make Shackleton's life a fair bit of misery
Yeah.
for
I'm
that.
sure they've improved since then.
Well, Michael Palin was one of their recent presidents, so
Right. I visited the RGS on one occasion. It was a
yeah,
lovely time for a talk. So it's a much more welcoming looking place now.
yes,
But yeah, thankfully, 110 or whatever years ago,
yes.
all gone now. But yeah, that was yeah,
I do. I mean, you said of how it was funny how you said how strongly you felt, because I suddenly remembered when I watched that scene. This isn't the first time I've seen this film, but when I watched it again recently, I remember thinking, if I was sitting there in that, if I'm Amundsen's place and I was sitting there, I would be using an immense amount of self-control
yeah,
not to say anything, because
yeah,
the
yeah.
temptation would to be say something very cutting and very sharp and very condescending in response.
Well, I mean,
And
he deserved it. But,
and Amundsen, to his credit, just sat there and he took it.
yeah,
Unfortunately, when he published his memoirs,
yeah, he was as bad as they were.
well, he let rip on it. Was all. I mean, his memoirs aren't popular. I mean, it was at the end of a long career, and all his grievances over the years were clearly all bottled up inside him, and he all went, exploded. And unfortunately, and I'm not mentioning any spoilers because this is a biopic. This is what led to his downfall, because when Nobile went missing, and I don't think, I mean, it is mentioned in the credits of the end film, Nobile and most of his men were found, or just over half his men were found alive. Amundsen clearly wanted to rewrite the history, he didn't want his whole career as polar explorer to end on such bitterness, and he volunteered to be involved in the rescue of Nobile. And when a plane set off on its first leg towards Spitsbergen, from where the main rescue would take place, of course, the plane vanished between Tromsø on the top of Norway and Spitsbergen. And it's the radio stood 2 hours after they flew off, and no more was known, apart from 2 months later when 2 items from the plane were found constructed as a life raft, as a float to keep the, but that would have meant that the plane couldn't take off. So it's likely Amundsen was either killed in the initial crash or he died of exposure or drowned very shortly afterwards.
Yeah.
They certainly wouldn't have had enough food and drink to keep alive. I mean, say the very last scene is conjecture, but fairly likely. But it's a sad end. On one end, it's something poetic about Amundsen being the Viking warrior whose final mission off into the sunset and doesn't come back. But it's, it doesn't detract from the, not just Amundsen, but the people he was with.
Yeah, he was clearly a very remarkable and driven man.
Yeah,
that came through very clearly in the film.
Yeah.
But also had the flaws, unfortunately, to match. They did well bringing that out. Even falling out with his brother very badly, and not as practically minded as he could have been.
No.
For example, in the way he dealt with the house, giving it to a woman who's one of the richest people in the country. But yeah, they drew out some of the threads of his life really well. The narrative was it was pretty good. There was only one point where I got a little confused. The beginning is the final plane crash.
Yes.
20 minutes before then, he appeared to crash another plane. And I thought that was the one at the beginning, but
no,
it wasn't.
And that confused me initially as well. But it was only when I saw at the beginning, I thought, oh, this is the bit where Amundsen disappears.
Yeah.
But when I saw the bit 20 minutes when it thought, oh, this is the one failure in Amundsen's career in his life, when he wanted to be, he made his first serious attempt at North Pole as an impersonation, and had two planes to fly over, but they N24 and N25 crashed. Well, or one of them crashed and either had to stop and couldn't start again. About 120 miles from the North Pole, or roughly round about there. And they spent 3 weeks cutting out a runway, makeshift runway, and making sure the plane was sufficiently airborne. And Amundsen said in his memoirs, his heart was in its stomach when, as it was taking off, there was a hummock of ice ahead, and could they climb enough go over? And he said that was one of the most terrifying moments of his life, where it was like, it's either do or die.
Yeah, that was one of the best moments, great moment in the film, where it disappears, the plane disappears over, but you think, oh, has it crashed now? And they cut to another scene, then they go back to that one and it soars into the sky. I kind of wish the film had been able to end there, but not to be. But yeah, that was a great scene. That
there was also that reminder of that scene when he's at the North Pole in the airship going over the ice in 1926, and the Italians get up this large flag to dump over there, and of course compared to it. And what annoyed Amundsen, and which isn't in films, Nobile gave Amundsen and the others lectures about weight capacity. You're only allowed X, Y, and Z, very strict, obviously, being in an airship.
Yeah.
So they didn't really take that, and they had only tiny little American and Norwegian flags and stuff, and this huge Italian flag is taken out.
Okay.
Alongside the tiny flags over the North Pole, and a cross that was blessed by Pope Pius XI. And
right.
Yeah.
No, I don't think they're fooling anyone with the size of the flag.
No.
History remembers Amundsen before Nubile.
Yeah.
I'd never heard his name before, to be honest.
No. So what did you make of Amundsen's other expeditions?
Really well done. The South Pole, that was one of the many things I didn't know, was that he was supposed to go north, but said, right, we're going south.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a shame that they couldn't make more of the rivalry with Scott. He appears at the World Geographic Society, and he's half decent, and that's it. We don't see him except his body later on. But I could understand, as it was, the film was 2 hours, having Scott in it more. Well, the film's not really specifically about the two of them. It would make it too long as well. But it was, that was fascinating to see the difficulties he had with the South Pole. I mean, he planned it very well, but it wasn't plain sailing or skiing. The dogs, dog gate was, oh my goodness, that's a bit rough. All the dogs are doing for him. But you could see why. They said, right, we can't keep them. I'd love to go back to watch that scene in the light of his obsessive desire to go to the North Pole by any means possible, because he criticizes, when he gets back home or to London, he criticizes Scott for not following the correct advice. And using ponies, he said, and did you say mechanical means?
Yes, Scott used tractors, but there are lots of the mechanical things.
Right.
There were three. There were about 2 or 3.
Right.
I don't know. One fell through the ice when they were loading it from the Terra Nova when it was in McMurdo Sound in Antarctica.
Yeah.
I think one engine just froze. Couldn't, the other one, I don't know. I think there was a third, but I'm not sure.
Right. And then there's Amundsen. Oh, that's rubbish. And then how does he get to the North Pole? But by using an aeroplane and an airship. So I thought, is he turning into Scott here?
But there is a difference in there's Amundsen in making those criticisms in 1913, and Amundsen in 1925-26, when technology had But I know what you're saying.
Yeah, so I mean that was I make no claim for it being accurate or anything, but correct. But that did cross my mind. I liked how with his different expeditions, I mean, how many ways can you represent a man walking to the coldest place on earth? And the writers obviously had to sit down and say, right, the South Pole will be defined in two ways, by the success of it and the dogs, and falling through the ice. Then when he goes north the first time, the ship will get stuck. The second time, the aeroplanes will crash and he can't use them. Then there's the airship. So they brought something different out to keep your interest in the story, different aspects of each voyage, which was well done. The framing of the film I quite liked. Well, it's quite interesting because first, the major framing is the final crash.
Yeah.
And then there's this kind of a secondary framing of it because it's not the story direct from him, Amundsen, it's coming through his brother, Leon, telling the story to his girlfriend, whose name I forget.
Magda or Helga?
Yeah, something like Magid. Was it Bess or was that Kiss?
Bess.
Elizabeth. Anyway, so there's a double framing going on there. Which was quite interesting. I don't think I've seen that in a film before. It's the only shame about the way the narrative was structured was the little confusion over the aeroplanes. But I mean,
Best Magids,
right?
Yeah.
So that was quite neat. I like that. His difficulties with his men showed it was a really warts and all story. This is certainly not a hagiography. They're showing the real man.
I felt sorry for Johansson. On one hand, I felt really sorry for him, particularly as Johansson was with Nansen on Nansen's furthest north, where he broke the record by 3 degrees of latitude.
Right. So
however,
which one was Johansson?
The one who I'm about to say, where he criticised Amundsen to his face at a meeting, and Amundsen made sure he wasn't in the team going to the South Pole. On one hand, I feel intensely sorry for Johansson. If there was any other way Amundsen could do this and keep his sense of leadership, he should have done that, whatever else that thing was, because Johansson was a brilliant man in many ways in terms of it, but his dependability. But on the other hand, we need to remember this is Antarctica. This is a wilderness. You openly challenge the leader like that, the leader will have to, in order to maintain his leadership and respect, will have to slap you down in full view of everyone else. And that was clearly Amundsen's way of, even though Johansson was in the right in terms of his argument, he should have said that to Amundsen privately and in a more conciliatory manner. Like the sort of advice of, now, come on, we could do it this way, and we could, but no, he took him on in public and in a confrontational manner, and Amundsen therefore felt clearly he had no choice. But to assert himself.
Leadership there. What would a good leader or a great leader do? That's what he decided was the right thing.
But then Johansson went into alcoholism and committed suicide when he got back. I think he was an alcoholic before the Antarctic thing, but I think, he didn't give Johansson anything. If there was a way where he could slap Johansson down, but give Johansson something where he could walk back with his head held high. Something to be proud of, then I will, But
so was it Johansson that shot himself?
Yes,
that was him, right? Okay, that makes sense now.
And I think that's horrible it was a horrible situation, but I could see where both were coming from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I'd rather agree with you that Johansson did the wrong thing in making it public, as it were, in front of everyone else, and Amundsen the wrong thing in putting him down publicly.
I think once that happened, I can see why Amundsen had to do that.
Yeah, but
I can see the argument for it. But if there was any other way where he could assert his authority and help Johansson, then he should have done it.
I mean, could you not have taken him behind a closed door and said, right, this is the situation and why it can't be as you want it to be?
Yeah.
I don't know.
We're talking about an event that actually happened over a century ago between people who are very different from you and I. So, yeah.
These kind of leadership questions, they'll be coming up all the time. Somewhere in the world, something like that will have happened. People having to deal with those kind of issues.
Yeah. So, do you see any similarity between Amundsen and other explorers?
So I know relatively few explorers. The one that I know half well is a guy called Rafe Bagnold.
Yes.
Who explored the Libyan desert.
Yes.
Desert to the left of Egypt on the map.
Yeah.
And he was a very different leader to Amundsen. I mean, the polar opposite, you could say. But sorry. Have you cut me off? No, right?
No. You're still here.
So yeah, he was an army officer. Yes. And in between of his army work, every year he would go to Egypt to explore some more of the desert. Yeah. Even when he was in India, he and his colleagues, they just drove. They drove from India to Egypt. And he had none, from what I know of his career, he had none of the problems that Amundsen did. I think he was just a far more of a people person.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
So they never got into the kind of scrapes at the polar that Amundsen did. No. Not that they necessarily planned everything perfectly, but they were able to avoid. I mean, the desert can be a deadly place.
Yeah,
they avoided that. So Amundsen, I feel that he's a bit on the extreme end. Of explorer, like his brother. Well, it's his brother's words, but he did rather come across as someone who's just obsessive about this is what I want, what I'm going to get. And they don't show him necessarily sacrificing his men, but he's pretty cold towards them in his personality.
It was hit and miss whether they want. It wasn't like Shackleton, where just about every man who was under Shackleton, even those who crossed him, had warm words to say about him. It's a bit hit and miss with Amundsen, I think.
Amundsen's people don't really. Thinking about it now, correct me if I'm wrong, but we don't really hear that much from them. There's only very limited dialogue with them. For example, Johansson's criticism, or the guys who wanted to leave. Not Knudsen, the other guy. We don't really hear much from them.
Yeah,
I think they must have, people like Wistin must have respected him, because he goes off with him more than once.
Oh yes, and he lived into the 1960s.
Right.
He was the last surviving person who was at the South Pole.
Right. Yeah.
The first, and
so he clearly respected him, but whether he had the same respect that Shackleton's men had for him, well, I'm not sure, because we don't really hear his voice much, or his colleagues.
No.
So Bagnold is the only one I could compare him with, and he's much, as befitting the kind of places he was, a warmer personality. But yeah, it's the pictures, the photos I saw of Amundsen. He certainly did seem to be someone who grew into his face.
Yes,
So
he looked,
stern, very Victorian,
yeah,
stereotype,
very austere, kind of the hawk
very
nose
austere.
and the glaring eyes.
I couldn't believe he was only 56 when he died.
Yeah,
And he looks 20 years older, but then I guess he was going to very extreme places, and that's going to tell on you.
And I would question how long he would have lived had he not gone off in that. Maybe you almost wonder whether subconsciously he knew he could be going to his death, or got caught up, or he wanted to keep going and going and going until he couldn't go back anymore. He couldn't go back.
That's very Alexandrian. It must have been in the back of his mind that this time could be the last time. But, whenever we go outside, this day could be the day I don't look when I cross the road and get run over. But it doesn't stop us doing it, because perhaps we don't think it won't happen to me. And maybe he thought, I've been out there so much.
Yeah, I mean, we all know each of us we're going to die one day, preferably later rather than sooner. But we all tend to, I think, subconsciously, there's a part of us that likes to think we're immortal, and or the rules don't apply to us, so we'll live for very long. It's, as you said, it's hit and miss. I mean, we're talking when we started this live stream, we were talking about just quickly sort of the pleasantries of how are you, and I was saying I ought to lose weight. So I am aware mortality is never far from my thoughts, whereas if I don't lose weight, X, Y, and Z could happen.
Sure.
So and diabetes is virulent in my family, so I do need to be careful.
Right.
But let's move on. Talking of death does play a major a central role in the next film we're discussing, Operation Mincemeat, because it's about a dead. It all concerns around a dead body, and like Amundsen, this is a real true life film that's fairly true to what happened.
Yeah, more or less. They, if I can use that horrible term, they sex it up.
Oh yes,
the cinema.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's in its essentials, it's pretty accurate. Yeah, based on on Ben McIntyre's excellent book.
Yes.
If anyone watching this has a mind to read it, McIntyre's a great spy author.
Yes.
Thoroughly recommend him. And so this is based on his book.
Now, for those who don't know, Operation Mincemeat was in part the brainchild of Ian Fleming, the creator of James Bond, but also the idea of one or two others.
I think the kernel of the idea is Fleming's.
The kernel of the idea is Fleming's,
developed by others. Yeah.
And also it's going to look him up. I've forgotten the name of the person played by Matthew McFadden, because I think he had some of the central ideas. The surname is difficult to pronounce.
Oh, Chumley.
Chumley, that's it. I need to say Chumley. It's spelt Chomondley.
Yeah.
But it's Chumley, Charles Chumley.
Charles Chumley.
And he had the idea, or he had some of the idea, but the kernel of the idea, as you said, was Ian Fleming's. And basically, get a dead body, dress him up as a senior army or naval officer, dump him in the med, make it out that he had fallen out of being a survivor of a plane crash, put fake important documents of it, make sure it washes up on the Spanish coast, make sure the Nazis get to hear about it, and the documents are to say that the Allies will land in Greece when really they'll be landing in Sicily, because everyone will assume they're landing in Sicily unless they throw the scent off. And it's very nerve-wracking as to whether because it's such a fantastic idea and such a bizarre idea, it might actually work. And And again, I don't think it's mentioning any spoilers to know that the Allies did invade Sicily, and that paid off. But
it fooled nearly all the Nazis. It did not fool Goebbels. He wasn't taken in by the idea, but kind of wisely, given his circumstances, he looked around and saw that all the other chief Nazis, they all bought it, hook, line, and sinker. Yeah. So he just kept his mouth shut for that one. He decided not to fight the battle.
Yeah.
And one of the things that the film brings out with a deft touch is the Nazi spy chief, who it had to go through him, von someone, I forget his name. And there's a suggestion in McIntyre's book.
Von Rohn. Alexis von Rohn. R-O-E-N-N-E.
Yeah, von Rohn. So he may have been a Christian who was fighting his own fight against the Nazis from the inside. And there's a suggestion in the book that maybe he wouldn't have been, because he was too smart. He wouldn't have been fooled, but let it go, because he did send fake information up the line. In other cases, he was later implicated in the Valkyrie affair.
Yes.
So unfortunately was executed.
Yes.
But it's an outrageous idea, and even more outrageous that it actually worked.
There were moments, of course, of dark humor involved in it, and I've got two favorite scenes. One of them is when the naval Nicholas Rowe, who many years ago played young Sherlock Holmes, in this one plays got his name. He's the Navy. Works for the British Embassy in Madrid.
Right.
And he goes to the dead body, and one of them says, "Here's all his papers and stuff, and you can take them."
Oh yes.
Well,
yes.
Oh, surely it should go through the official channels first before they take them. No. You think about our country. Half the Spanish police are corrupt, and a lot of them are Nazi sympathizers. We can't do that. That isn't helpful to you. So why don't you just...
Yeah.
And he has to think very quickly on his feet.
Yeah. I don't think that happened in reality.
No, but it's very funny.
It's one of those scenes that are in there to ramp up the tension.
Yeah.
The same with the sudden appearance of a member of the dead man's family, Major Martin's family. The whole reason for them using his body was that there was no one who's likely to come knocking. And it's a very odd moment, because she comes knocking, they offer her money, she storms off. You half expect that she would go off to a newspaper and say, they're doing something with his body, they won't give it to me back. And I couldn't see, I have to admit, that's one of my criticisms of the narrative.
I don't think during the war, the paper, if she did that, I don't think the newspapers would run with it. Because if you're a newspaper editor during the war and a person came to you and they did that, would you run with the story?
Yeah, I would think 2 or 3 times and then probably not. No, you're
exactly,
right.
Because you're thinking that could be something to do with national security. I cannot let this, I don't want to impede that.
Yeah, and then get the D notice the next day.
Exactly.
But, I mean, as part of the film, I thought the film didn't really need that scene.
No. But I think I can see why they put it. They wanted to emphasize, and I think this is important. This is whether looking at Operation Mincemeat or an earlier dramatization, The Man Who Never Was, which was far more fictionalized because they knew less.
Yeah.
A lot less had yet to, a lot more had yet to come out. And also when you're looking at the case factually, what needs to be borne in mind throughout is this isn't just about a dead body. This is a dead body of a human being. This is a person who lived and worked and loved and, was human, whatever his flaws, whatever his problems, whatever his upsets, was a human being.
Yeah.
And I think I can see why they put that scene in, because they wanted to bring in that remind audiences this was
Sure.
the person who
That's a fair point.
had a family back home. And it was, and this is 2 or 3 scenes after the first series of Black Humor where they try and get a photograph of him.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
I felt guilty laughing when they were like trying to pop it up and everything. And it reminded me of did you ever watch Drop the Dead Donkey?
I've heard of it, but I never watched it.
There is a scene where Damien Day, played by Stephen Tompkinson, a journalist who's determined to get the story, even if it means breaking every ethical code in the book, films another execution in this barbaric thing. And as they go, the gunman goes, ready, aim, fire. He turns to the camera and goes like that at the crucial moment. So it's like,
right,
we're going to have to do this again. And David's like, what? Shoot him again? And he pays him money. They put gaffer tape because the body's going out to get the guards to shoot the dead body again before the cameras. And part of you finds it funny, and part of you's like, oh my God, this is awful.
Yeah.
And it was the same thing. There was the black humor of the film, but also it's like, yeah, this is a bit grim, really.
Yes. But at least this was something that actually happened. I don't know if they put the body up like that, but they tried to photograph it and they couldn't because of the decay. Yeah. So it was based on a real moment in time, as it were.
Yeah. What did you think of the real life people in it, like Winston Churchill and Ian Fleming?
Churchill, it wasn't the best version of Churchill that I've seen. Yes. The actor's a good actor, but
Simon Russell Beale.
Yeah, I didn't feel he quite nailed him down.
Yeah.
I mean, it was, it's not about Churchill, so it doesn't really matter too much. But I guess it must be quite hard to deliver a performance of Churchill that isn't a parody or a copy of another actor's.
I mean, everyone seems to think it's easy to do Churchill. All you have to do is to bulk up, have receding grey hair, and talk like this.
But that's just a parody. You can't do that in film.
Exactly.
People are going to laugh, and you've lost your audience.
Yeah.
Gary Oldman did it brilliantly in Darkest Hour.
Darkest Hour, yes.
But it was sufficeable in this one. Ian Fleming, I mean, is a blank canvas in terms of his how he comes across, because there's relatively little footage of him that I've seen, and it's much later in his life. So you can kind of play him however you want to. So that there's a lot less pressure. I think Johnny Flynn was the actor. He played him as a bit of a young buck.
Which essentially, I mean, Fleming does come across in real life, and he does in this film, but I don't know how much of this was coloured by what I knew of in real life as both likeable and dislikable at the same time.
Yeah, I thought it was a pretty positive image of him.
Yes.
And it's interesting because up until recently, I thought he was fairly low down in the intelligence world. But then via Twitter, via spy Twitter, I think, I was reading that actually, no, he got around and he was in big places.
He was.
I mean, he knew about the American atomic bomb.
Yeah.
So it completely reversed my understanding of him. And unfortunately, I forget where I saw the information. I think if it was via someone like Jeremy Duns, who's so good on Twitter, I wouldn't be surprised. But and then when I saw him in the film, he's the assistant for Godfrey.
Yes.
It made perfect sense that he would be with him here, there, and doing this, that, and the other, because he wasn't just a pen pusher.
No.
He knew big stuff from
And this
Bletchley
is
Park to
so-
New York to there and back again.
and this is part of the thing that led to James Bond, apparently, or one of the number of things that led to James Bond, which was Fleming was frustrated at not being a field agent.
Yeah.
And not being there, and he knew a lot of he knew the field agents who went there, and he knew some of this, how they equipped and stuff. And James Bond was sort of his frustration in that. And some wonder whether the field agents who Fleming assigned were based on James Bond. And then one of them said, I think in an interview years ago, he said something I was starting to suspect, which was, he said, I think James Bond is actually Ian, and is what he would like to have been if he were a field agent.
Yeah.
Which is, because there are similarities in some respects between Ian Fleming's personality and James Bond's. Fleming was Bond was a womanizer, so is Fleming.
Yeah.
Bond smokes and drinks heavily, so did Fleming. Bond also does scuba dives, golf, skis, so did Fleming. Fleming died from heart disease at the age of 56. People always mention that Bond's lifestyle is enough not to, to be very damaging to his health. Yeah. So you can kind of see. I love the bit, and this is apparently not the dialogue, but Fleming doing this. He refers to Godfrey as M.
Yeah.
His boss as M, and someone questioned, why do you refer to him as M? Because he reminds me of Mother, terrifying and yet worthy of respect.
Yes.
And
going into the film, I was expecting Fleming to turn up once or twice, do his funny, I'm writing a novel. Everyone's writing a novel. Yeah. And then that was it. But I really like the idea that he kept cropping up, and his appearances were used to reveal perhaps a little more behind how James Bond's world was created.
So and when he went to Q Branch as well.
And Q Branch as well, and so on and so forth. And the fact everyone's writing a novel, so's Fleming.
Didn't you just love the look on Fleming's face when he was in Q Branch looking at all the gadgets?
Yeah. But it's the watch, isn't it, that we see in close up?
Yeah.
Fascinated by. Yeah. And it's completely unnecessary to the film. But I think I can guess that the writer, the director, they put this in because basically piggyback, get people in off the back of the Bond references, which is a really smart move, to be honest. They did it in a really good way, so I have to respect that.
Yes. And Admiral Godfrey did feel like him in the Bond movies, didn't he? Well,
a bit more duplicitous. Perhaps.
I don't know. Would you fully, if Bernard Lee, Robert Brown, Judi Dench, and Ray Fiennes as M in the official films, any of them as M, would you fully trust M? Any of those M?
Maybe not, but you wouldn't expect to be betrayed by them.
No.
If he's asking people to keep a watch on you, then you ought to be off the job, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
It's that serious.
Yeah.
It's only for a story where that's justifiable. But yeah, in real life, I think Godfrey didn't get on with, it was either Cholmondeley or Montague, I forget which.
Yes.
But there was none of this. Keep an eye on him. I want him out.
Yeah. Cholmondeley and Montague were very good. The thing I liked about Cholmondeley and Montague, and I don't know how true this is that they were two very different people. But when they put on a united front, when they're together, they were like we're pitted against Godfrey. Again, I don't know if it's true. It did feel like unstoppable force meets a movable object.
Yeah, I can't remember now. I know the relationships were not easy with Godfrey.
No.
One of them, possibly Montague, was really not a fan of his. But yeah.
I can see why Godfrey was disliked by some. If I had a boss like that and I worked in wartime, I would respect him, but I wouldn't necessarily like him.
Sure. Well, that's understandable. It was interesting seeing Jason Isaacs again, because I just watched The Death of Stalin.
I was going to mention that, and also Simon Russell Beale is
who played Stalin.
Yeah.
So I'm still laughing at Jason Isaacs in that film.
Yeah.
But yes,
there's that line. I'm going to have to report this to the Central Committee. Going to talk, and you should have a look at your beep beep face. You know, and the way they used various accents as an emphasis on the Russian thing. Like, if this was in the UK, Stalin would be, you know, given how accents are seen within Russia, Stalin would be a Cockney. You know, you do get, And in those very brief scenes at the beginning, Stalin does come across as fairly terrifying. I mean, that bit where it says, "You want to know where Polnkov's gone? Do you? Do you want to go there?" I felt scared, and I was watching it. So yeah, for those, we ought to do the Death of Stalin at some point in the future. But for those of you watching this at the moment, not only go and see Operation Mincemeat and Amundsen, do go and see the Death of Stalin on DVD. You can. It's banned in Russia as well, so that's an extra incentive to go and see it.
And look out for Jason Isaacs when.
Let's go, ladies.
I've got a grin on my face, but I'm very upset, and I've omitted a choice word that he used. He delivers it so well. It's my favorite line in the film, and there's some good lines in there.
I mean, let's face it, in the Death of Stalin, who would you be, out of those, apart from Beria, perhaps, who would you be most scared of crossing out of all of them?
I'd be terrified of a lot of them. They're rats in a bag. They are the rats in Skyfall who would quite happily eat each other until they're the only one left.
You get the impression it's such a terrifying thing that when they have the Politburo in its reduced movement have their first vote, they're all watching each other, and it's like carried unanimously as they all.
Oh no, it's an awful place to be.
And also when they after one of Stalin's evenings, they go. It is clearly a tradition with them. It goes home to go home to their respective wives, and once they're still drunk and can remember what's going on, they tell their wives what happened at the party and get to write it all down so they can read it when sober the following morning, and they can know in advance whether they're in the shit or not. Language, but whether they're in trouble or not.
That's basically it. That would turn me into a teetotaler, I think.
But that's the Death of Stalin, and Operation Mincemeat has its own moments of black humor. Did you notice actually Admiral Godfrey, his office looks similar to M's in the classic Bond films?
I think there's a bit of reverb though, because I imagine M's office in the old Bond films, or they would have modelled it on perhaps what in reality
the old War Office, what they imagined it would have looked like based on the.
There's some great comedy in it. The driver who can't see.
Oh, he was a racing driver. He was a racing driver, and he got. You know what happened? I looked up afterwards. He got killed in a road accident.
I think he has a corner or part of a racing track named after him, somewhere. But I forget where. It'd be in the book.
Oh, it's when he's all. I remember watching that, thinking, you feel like you're among tears. You're just like, oh no, they got it.
After all this.
And you kind of feel when they get out in Scotland and they come out the body, Chumley and Montague get out the back, and you feel, well, they're alive.
We survived that. But it's a shame that Commander Jewell didn't get more screen time, although perhaps not sure how he would have done. The submarine commander. He played a very important role. But Chumley never went into the sub in the film. He goes, but in reality he didn't. That's, I think, a way of connecting the first part of the story about the lead up to the mission and then the mission itself, so that you don't have an entirely different bunch of characters taking over.
What did you make of the I'd say love triangle, but it's more like unrequited cross-pollination of attractions. You've
Well, that
got
was based on what happened. So that was based on reality.
So for the viewers, Montague's wife and children, or wife and son, are off to America.
Yeah.
Montague and his wife are still in love with each other,
Yeah.
but they are, like a lot of couples in wartime, there are strains on their marriage and there are problems in their marriage, and they know that there's a risk with her going to America, it could permanently rupture the marriage.
And
in the course of what's going on, with Operation Mincemeat, Montague finds himself very much attracted to a young female who's writing all the love letters for us, Jean Leslie.
Yeah.
And the attraction is reciprocated. However, Charles Cholmondeley notices this. On one hand, he's rightfully not impressed by what's going on because of the things. But I mean, let's face it, you kind of see it in the film. And you do see enough of life to know he's attracted to Jean himself, and he's not her type, and he knows it. And there's the conflicted emotions between jealousy and a sort of moral outrage as is concerned. Jean Leslie herself is a widow, and she's attracted to Montague, but she wants to do the right thing as well.
It was a bit rum that they got rid of her character later on. Again, in real life, she was there all the way.
Yeah.
But in the film, I suppose it's their way of solving the dilemma.
Yeah.
Right. Well, the affair is going nowhere, so now she has to leave.
Yes.
That was a bit hard on her.
And Montague's marriage did actually survive the war, and it continued. So this was perhaps, I mean, all marriages go through highs and lows, and this was clearly a deep low, which they were lucky to get out of.
And I think Jean Leslie lived a long time afterwards. I'm half sure.
I think didn't Cholmondeley as well. I don't know. The Montagues lived into the 1980s, I know, but
there was a documentary. So the book was published around 2010, and the BBC did a documentary based on it with Ben McIntyre.
Yeah.
And it's on YouTube, so you can watch it there. A friend of mine from university, Stuart Hamilton, is a pathologist.
Oh,
and
right.
interviewed him for the programme.
Oh, so you have a slight personal connection with him.
A very slight one. And I watched this last year after, as I was reading the book.
Yeah.
And I hadn't spoken to Stuart in years.
Yeah.
But I found out his email address online.
Yeah.
And got in touch with him. So now we've swapped a couple of emails. So I must tell him I've seen the film.
Yeah.
But it was lovely watching the film and then thinking, I recognise that guy.
Yes.
But yeah. But I'm sure Jean Thingy is...
she was just 18 in 1940.
Yeah, I'm sure she's interviewed in the documentary. At least one or two people from that room are. So it's well worth watching for many reasons, and that included.
They do look similar. I'm just looking them up. They look very similar to, the actors look very similar to the roles.
Yeah. Some of them more than others, I think.
Well, Matthew McFadden, once the glasses and the false moustache go on, he's definitely, you can see the strong resemblance to Charles Cholmondeley.
Yeah, Colin Firth doesn't really look like Montague, I think.
No, he doesn't, but he's Colin Firth.
Yeah, so
he can get away with it.
I was happy with that. Happy to see him on the screen.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, out of summing up, out of 10, what would you give Amundsen, with 1 being low and 10 being high? And out of 10, what would you give Operation Mincemeat?
Yeah, Amundsen. I think I would give it 8 or 8.2 or 8.3.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't a film, although it wasn't a film I was comfortable with, I don't think that was because of a fault of the film.
No.
Because I was watching a film about someone who's frankly not particularly likable and doing not very likable things as well as being successful. So I don't want to give it a low grade because I didn't happen to like the figure of Amundsen.
Yes.
So I think I'd say 8.3, and I would give Mincemeat probably 7.8 or 8.
Okay.
Because I don't think it's the best British war film that ever was.
Which is the best British war film? Just
or spy film. Well, I think The Courier is better.
okay.
I think it's better. Well, it's better than Tinker Tailor. Actually, is it? Not sure. I would have to think more about my favorite.
Okay.
But I feel it in my gut that it's a bit lightweight as spy films go.
Yes.
But with that said, it was an enjoyable story. Some of it's the things the writer wrote I disagreed with, but they didn't get in the way of it. Good performances, a pretty exciting film. So I would definitely buy it. I will definitely buy it on DVD. So yeah, I'd say 7.8 or somewhere between there and 8. So say 7.9.
Okay.
Yeah. The only thing I'd really mark down on it was the soundtrack. I was a bit disappointed that it wasn't better.
Yeah. The thing that bothers me about some modern soundtracks is I don't really notice them compared to, say, in the classic era like John Barry or even John Williams or stuff. You don't get to hear the music so much. David Arnold's an exception, but
he's brilliant.
and Hans Zimmer, but
at the top of the tree, really.
Yes.
Hans Zimmer is just such a fantastic composer.
Yes.
And David Arnold, he's written, I think, one of my most favorite movie pieces. So yeah.
Casino Royale?
No, the car chase at the start of Quantum of Solace.
Right, yes.
I absolutely love that. It's just perfect for the scene that it's accompanying.
I do hope he did with the next James Bond film and with a new James Bond, he comes back. But
I wouldn't argue if they did. I hope they get new writers, give new writers a chance or different writers.
Yeah.
I trust them.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Malcolm, for another exciting evening. And
what are your grades though, before we finish?
Oh yes, of course. Sorry, after all that, I didn't say, did I?
No. Let's hear it.
I'd give Operation Mincemeat 8.
8.
Amundsen possibly 7.5 or 8. I'm a bit Amundsen. It's close to what happened, so there is an element of that. But there's something not altogether there with Amundsen, whether it's the budget confinement or what. But I don't really want to do a downer too much on Amundsen, because where Amundsen works, it works brilliantly and successfully and wonderfully, and I don't want to detract from that.
Sure.
So possibly 7.5, almost the reverse of yours. 7.5 for Amundsen, 8 for Operation Mincemeat.
Right, well, that's fair enough. Yeah.
Yes. Maybe we're too close to it because you tended to know a bit more of what was going on with Operation Mincemeat, and I tended to know a bit what's going on in Amundsen, and maybe we're a bit too close to our respective. And
Mincemeat had Colin Firth in it, which is always going to jump it up several points. I mean, well, if I did that.
Also, it was 3 out of 10, which is or 1 out of 10. Sorry.
Well, no, I was trying not to think of him. If I thought of him, well, 9 out of 10. So I'm never going to vote down something with him in it.
I'll have to find a film with him in. And
I agree. I mean, it's quite possible we're too close. If we talked about it in 6 months, maybe we'd give different grades. But I think the most important thing to say about them is I think both of them were good and very well worthy of being watched. If anyone has a mind to, definitely do. Yeah, you would not be wasting 2 hours of your life if you watched either of them.
Yes, and hopefully we'll come back next month with another film. It may be the death of Stalin, it may not be, but hopefully, considering mentioning it, we ought to be doing the death of Stalin at some point this year.
I mean, if things go well in the Ukraine, perhaps we could have the death of Stalin.
Careful.
By absolutely not thinking of anybody else at all.
No.
I don't know what you're thinking of, Paul.
No. It would be good to do Death of Stalin at some point.
Yeah, it is a good film. It's a very funny film, very black humoured film.
Yeah.
And very relevant, I imagine, to the day.
Well, given that Russia seems to be, sadly, again, a country that one cannot
it is
in entirely friendly terms. Anyway.
I think back to 9/11 and how supportive Putin was of America back then and where we are now. And it's
indeed.
There it is.
Well, have a good weekend, Malcolm, and catch up on things. Thank you.
Okay, and thank you for having me. Yeah.